You've heard the story. Capitalism builds a nation's productivity and wealth. Communism kills its growth, stability, and structure. Nodding along so far? Then how would you explain this? This isn't the US or Canada. This is China, the biggest, most aggressive communist country. The media frowns upon it. The political world mocks it. But truth be told, it is the biggest success story of communism. Or is it?
Argue that a lot of China's success is due to the introduction of free markets, but if we want to run with this idea that China is a socialist country, which is just fundamentally untrue.
While most people believe that China's success came by following Karl Marx's vision, others would argue it's because of quietly abandoning him. So what is China really? A communist success story or a capitalist superpower in disguise? Let's find out. This is the story of how China isn't actually communist. What is communism? By definition, communism is a political and economic ideology that positions itself in opposition to liberal democracy and capitalism. It advocates instead for a classless system in which the means of production are owned communally and private property is non-existent or severely curtailed. So basically a classless system where every individual gets equal rights and privileges regardless of their financial background. Ideally, everyone works for the state and the state takes care of all their needs. But is this true in the case of China? Let's find out. Red labels and illusions. Communism believes in a classless society, but somehow China has more billionaires than any country on earth, except the US. In communism, all the businesses are supposed to be state-controlled, but Tencent, Alibaba, BYD, Temu, and many other Chinese companies aren't. Why does the Chinese government offer tax breaks to foreign investors, host international expos, and encourage young people to start tech startups? That's not communism, that is a free market wrapped in Mandarin. But this is where it gets interesting. The Chinese Communist Party never officially stopped being communist, they just adapted. Or maybe they evolved. Or maybe they lied. But before we throw verdicts around, let's rewind. Up until the 1970s, China was starving, broken, and locked out of the global economy. And then came the man who opened the gates, a quiet reformer, and the father of the most important economic experiment of the 20th century. His name? Deng Xiaoping, and what he did changed everything. It's the 1950s, and you've woken up in China under Mao Zedong's rule. Your clothes? Standard grey uniform, same as your neighbors. Your home? Bare, cramped, government-issued. Your job? Assigned by the state. Your food? Rationed, not bought. And you better not complain because the rice bowl isn't just a meal, it is your link to survival. You own nothing, you control nothing, not the land beneath your feet, not the fruits of your labor, even your thoughts have to toe the party line, or else.
Since 2017, the Chinese government has detained more than 1 million Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in internment camps across Xinjiang.
On this day 23 years ago, the Chinese Communist Party officially started clamping down on Falun Gong.
This was true communism, Mao style, not just an economic system but an all-consuming ideology. Private businesses? Illegal. Profit? Sinful. Incentive? A dirty word. This was communist China with no class-based system, but it's not that everyone was equally rich, rather everyone was equally poor. Mao did take some initiatives, like the Great Leap Forward, which was Mao's dream of rapid industrialization, but it ended with tens of millions dead. And the Cultural Revolution, that was less about culture and more about silencing anyone with a brain, a book, or a slightly different opinion. By the 1970s, China wasn't just behind the West, it was falling behind itself. But then this one village changed everything. How? Let's travel back to Xiaogang Village in 1978. But before that, if you enjoy learning more about today's economic stories, be sure to subscribe. In 1978, a group of 18 farmers, tired of watching their children starve, did the unthinkable. They gathered late at night and signed a secret pact on a torn piece of paper. The deal? Divide the communal land amongst themselves, grow their own food, keep what they produce after paying the state its due. A forbidden act of capitalism in the heart of communism. They even included a clause: if any of them are caught and executed, the others will raise their children. They hid the contract in a bamboo tube under the roof tiles, but word got out. People in nearby villages started doing the same, and eventually the authorities found them, and then something even more shocking happened. You might think that the government would have executed those farmers, but the new government, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, gave the model a chance. Their model was studied, approved, and then scaled all the way to be used by the entire country. That one act of rebellion became the template for Deng's first wave of reforms, the household responsibility system, where farmers were allowed and eventually encouraged to keep surplus produce and sell it for profit. Profit, the dirty word, was back, and it was feeding the people. It was the beginning of a new economic philosophy, which we call socialism with Chinese characteristics. The philosophy may have the word socialism in it, but it was screaming capitalism. But that was just in the agriculture sector. The remainder of China still remained communist, until it didn't. The rise of SEZs. That's Shenzhen, a megacity that's the heart of China's technology, home to tech giants like Huawei, Tencent, DJI, and some of the busiest shipping ports in the world. But that wasn't always the case. Until the 1980s, Shenzhen was a sleepy fishing village of 30,000, with dirt roads, rice paddies, and barely any electricity. At that time, it served as a route for Chinese citizens to smuggle themselves from a communist society into a capitalist one. But then, this place led the entirety of the country from a communist to a capitalist society. When Deng took control, he didn't overthrow communism. He did something far smarter. He created a loophole inside the system. He chose 4 coastal regions like Shenzhen and labeled them Special Economic Zones, or SEZs. These weren't regular communist cities, they were controlled experiments. Inside SEZs, private businesses were allowed, foreign companies could invest, workers could earn more based on output, and most shocking of all, profits weren't considered evil anymore. But none of this was advertised as capitalism, so that communists could swallow it, and it worked. Factories sprouted like weeds, foreign direct investment or FDI poured in, Hong Kong money, Taiwanese entrepreneurs, and even Americans took notice. What they saw wasn't red communism, it was green, the color of growth, trade, and cash flow. And here's the real twist, the rest of China still looked the same, poor, slow, and centrally planned. But these zones, they were running on market liberalization, where the forces of supply and demand, not the government, decided what was produced and for how much. It wasn't just Shenzhen, there were 3 others too, Zhuhai, Xiamen, and Shantou, all coastal, all close to global trade routes. China wasn't just reforming, it was opening up. But outside these turbo-capitalist cities, China remained the same, a Marxist-communist society where the whole system held together, just barely. And it wasn't just trade. Deng introduced the Factory Manager Responsibility System, a policy where state-run factories could keep extra profits if they exceeded quotas, a profit motive in a communist system, another quiet mutation. Soon, industries that had been stagnant started humming again, incentives worked, efficiency returned, and money flowed. By the 1990s, China had over 2,000 development zones, not just coastal hubs, but inland cities racing to replicate the Shenzhen miracle. Export-led growth took off. China was now building for the world: shoes, toys, electronics, steel, and everything that you can name. But with growth comes contradiction. How could a communist party allow billionaires and competition, even foreign corporate control? That's a question for later, because what started as a few zones of reform was slowly morphing into an entire nation restructured for capital, and the party that swore off capitalism, it became the biggest player in the capitalist game. But there's a darker side too, because not all of China opened up equally. Some regions were left behind, others boomed too fast, and soon Beijing started to feel threatened. So what do you do when capitalism grows inside a one-party state? You tighten the grip, and the cycle begins again. We'll get there in the next chapter. Shenzhen had become a symbol, a well-oiled engine that was responsible for an economic boost, and the model, after its success, was welcomed in every part of the country, gradually transforming Marxist China to capitalism in disguise. By the 2000s, China was booming. GDP growth hit double digits, hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty. The country joined the WTO in 2001. It became the world's factory, then slowly the world's market.
The rise of China is the biggest event in the recent economic history in the world.
Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, these weren't just companies, they were empires, innovating, expanding. This made the Chinese Communist Party, the institution that had outlawed private ownership just decades ago, start protecting it, at least temporarily. But the bigger the private players got, the more they started to overshadow the state itself. This didn't sit right with everyone, or maybe anyone, in the party. So they found a solution for that too, while riding the capitalist engine to not let go of the communist wheel. So they introduced state capitalism, still under the label of socialism. Anyways, state capitalism is a model where private enterprise exists, but they serve the state's goals. The government doesn't run every business, but it controls the environment, regulations, access to capital, legal frameworks, and in many cases, the data itself. In short, you can get rich as long as you don't challenge the party, and this became evident in Xi Jinping's time. When Xi Jinping rose to power in 2012, he didn't just inherit a growing economy, he inherited a fractured balance, booming private wealth, rising inequality, and powerful tech CEOs that were starting to look a bit too independent. His response? Tighten the reins. In 2020, Jack Ma, the face of Chinese innovation, gave a speech criticizing financial regulators. Weeks later, he disappeared from the public eye. His $35 billion IPO for Ant Group? Suspended. Since then, China's biggest tech firms have faced massive fines, strict regulations, content purges, and what many call political re-education. This wasn't just economic regulation, it was a message. You can grow, but you grow where the party tells you to. Xi branded it as common prosperity, a push to reduce inequality, rein in big capital, and reassert ideological control. But the subtext was clear. You can have a golden leash, but you cannot break out of it. And that's the contradiction at the heart of modern China. It's not communist in practice, not capitalist in name. It's a hybrid, an engineered balance between growth and control. A place where billionaires build tech empires but can vanish overnight, where the economy is open to the world but the conversation is closed. So where does that leave China now? Because while this model brought 40 years of growth, cracks are beginning to show. A slowing economy, a shrinking workforce, massive debt in local governments, rising youth unemployment, and a nervous private sector. China today is a paradox wrapped in progress. Skyscrapers, AI labs, 5G networks. It looks like the future, but underneath, cracks are forming. The very system that launched China to global prominence is starting to wobble. Youth unemployment is rising, local governments are drowning in debt, and private businesses, once the proud face of China's rise, are increasingly anxious. It's not about market competition, but about political signals. Because here's the risk with a system like this. When capital follows party lines instead of market demand, efficiency starts to slip, innovation slows down, and confidence drops. And the world is watching. Investors once lined up to enter China, now they're looking for the exits. Foreign direct investment has declined. Supply chains are diversifying. Global trust is shaky, not because of China's growth, but because of its control. So, was it all a lie? Not quite. China did grow. It did lift millions out of poverty. It did use capitalist tools better than many capitalist countries, but it never let go of the communist steering wheel. The Chinese Communist Party didn't abandon communism. It reinvented it as a tool, not a doctrine. And maybe that's the most important lesson here. Because whether you see China as a success story or a cautionary tale, one thing is clear. Ideology isn't always what it claims to be. Sometimes it's just packaging. But before we end the video, let's go back to the question, is China still communist? On paper, yes. In practice, it's something entirely new. We think that it's a hybrid beast that's still evolving, and what happens next depends on how long it can keep up the balance between power and profit, between control and creativity. But that's just what we think. Let us know your opinion. Do you think it's the beginning of China's downfall, or is China only going to grow further from here? Share with us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay tuned.